Hi, my name is Lizzie Harper and I'm a botanical illustrator, and today I'm going to make a film for you of me painting a flower. I haven't decided which one yet, I'm going to have to decide now, but it will be in real time, and this is for the New England Society of Botanical Artists. I'm looking forward to it, hope you are too. Right, so I've chosen a zinnia and here it is drawn up in pencil. I was wondering whether or not to show you the drawing process, but then 45 minutes is not a very long stretch of time, so I thought let's just crack on with the painting. So this zinnia is, if you can see, very pink. It's got pink here. It's a member of the daisy family. So these are all individual flowers. They just look like, we call them petals, but each is an individual flower, and obviously each of these, you can see, is an individual flower. And these little yellow bits here coming out, these are they're the stamens of each of the petals, and they're in the family, the daisy family, the Asteraceae family, and they're called composite flowers. Anyway, you don't need a lesson in botany, you're here for the painting. So I'm going to pop this back here, so in the hope that it won't die on us. It's always, as you lot know, the worry that your plant is going to die on you. So now I'm mixing up a colour to start on the petals with. So this is, what's it called? It's Opera Rose, isn't it? But I always call it slightly the wrong name. No, it is Opera Rose. It's Winsor & Newton Opera Rose. And it's quite close, but I think there's, a tiny bit more blue in there to get a closer match. And as you see, I mix up my colours quite thick, so that I always say they're kind of the consistency of blood, which is an unpleasant thing to say, but there we go. Generally, I use Winsor & Newton, and I use pans and I use tubes. Right, and I always use my trusty Winsor & Newton Series 7 brush. It's a number 1, and that's almost all I ever use. That colour looks pretty close to me. You can always check a colour by actually painting it onto the flower, which I know is just out of view. But let me show you. So you can always check the petal by holding your, painting directly on the flower. I find that quite useful. Or by painting a tiny swab on a corner and then checking. Right, let's stop procrastinating, shall we? So I don't know how adept the members of the New England Botanical Artists Society are. I would imagine there are many of you, oh, don't rotate, you wretched flower. I would imagine there are many of you who are professional, and probably many who are just as able, if not significantly more able than me. So if I tell you stuff that you already know, or if I speak down to you, please do feel ready to pick me up on it when we have a Q&A session on Zoom later. So the way I paint is I tend to put down my darkest darks first. Now I know this is very unusual in botanical illustration, and generally what people like to do, look, it's quite a lot paler in the middle. It'd be nice if I could have the flower in here as well, but I just don't know if that's feasible. So what I tend to do is I put the darks down first, rather than building up a series of washes. And I like to do this because it gives me some kind of a guide or a map as to where my lights and darks are. I mean, with botanical illustration, as with all art, so much of it is down to where your lights and darks are. If you crack that, then you're okay, because you're going to have depth to your illustration. So yeah, so this is a mix of cobalt blue and Opera Rose. Now Opera Rose I love, especially for botanical illustration, but you've got to be super careful because it is very fugitive, which means it fades in light. So if you, let's say you painted your zinnia and were delighted with the result, which hopefully you would be, and then you thought, oh well, I'm going to frame it and give it to somebody as a gift, you might, this is rotated, it's really annoying, you might find that if you put it in a frame, the light would fade the colour, so you need to be careful about that. And look at the way the colour chips off, isn't that fascinating? Oh, I love botany. Right, so what I'm doing is I'm building into my darks, and with flowers in general, with petals, if you I find if you pull the colour out, the darkest colour out towards the edges, then you end up giving some kind of form to each flower. So in 45 minutes, which is how long this video is going to be, I'm not going to have time to paint the whole flower for you, but I'll just try and do, I think I'll do a few petals, and then I'll also try and do the an area of the middle as well, so that you're not left with just a blank staring central area. So I'm working from my studio in Hay-on-Wye, which is a little town just across the border from England in Wales. And then we have a famous literary festival, which of course with COVID has been cancelled this year. But it's a very, very lovely place to live. And these flowers, this zinnia, come from a friend of mine whose job, she runs an amazing B&B up the top of a hill called Majestic Bus. And she also on the side grows fields of these gorgeous flowers, which she sells to local, well, to local individuals, but also to restaurants and stuff. So I had a lovely time yesterday up at hers, just wandering around with a pair of secateurs and thinking, what flowers might we want to do for the New England Botanical Artists Society? Okay, so this leaf, this petal here, is curled back on itself. And what's interesting about the petals here is they're pale underneath. They're not bright pink underneath as well. They're much paler. It's always worth, before you crack your paints out, having a proper look at your plant. I mean, the thing is, when you're drawing something, you're going to have a proper look at it anyway, because you're drawing it. So in order to draw it accurately, you need to observe it. I mean, I always have my little hand lens out and all that kind of stuff. So, and always draw what you see rather than what you believe to be there. That's a big trick. So something like that. So that's that one curving behind there. I do want to make sure. I'm going to move this up a little bit so you can see. Here we go. Let's do this petal then as well. So this one is very much behind the other one, so it's a little darker. So zinnia, I did my research before I started painting. Zinnia come in various forms. This one I believe to be probably a single flowered one. You can get double flowered ones. There are rows and rows of petals, and you can't even see the centre of the flower. And then you get single flowered ones like this one, where you've only got sort of one row of petals, and then you can see the centre of the flower really clearly. And then you have some called intermediate flowered. Actually, maybe this one's intermediate flowered because it does seem to have two rows of petals. Oh, I've rotated that wretched flower again. So perhaps that's more accurate. They were named after an eminent German botanist called Johann Zinn, who lived from 1727 to 1759. And they're native to southwest United States and down into South America. Mexico is supposedly a place where you'll find them growing in the wild, and most are the same form as this, so they're erect flowers with a single flowering head held at the end of a stem, terminal inflorescence, if you will. Okay, so there we go. So as you can see, I'm just building up the dark edges, and then I'm going to come and do these are much darker, okay, come and do an overwash. In between petals I like to leave a little white line. It ends up being covered up by the paint, but you can, it sets the detail of each petal apart, so you end up not getting a messy blur. We go. Okay, should we do this one as well? Maybe we'll just do those ones. I've got a little clock out in front of me to make sure that I don't lose track of time, because often when you're painting, and I'm sure you lot know this, you totally, especially if you get into what you're doing, you totally lose track of time. You just sort of end up, the hours go by, and then you look at the clock and you're like, oh my gosh, where did the last 3.5 hours go? That's so weird. Okay, so this colour is lovely, actually, this bright, indulgent pink. A lot of the things, I'm a professional botanical illustrator, which really just means that people pay me to paint flowers. There's nothing posher than that. But a lot of the stuff I'm asked to do, most of it is native British plants. There's a bit of a shadow here as well. Okay, all right, we have beautiful ones. Of course we do. We have the poppy and, you know, apple blossom and all that kind of stuff. But we do have a lot of very small things like ladies' bed straws and little things with tiny white flowers. So for me, the worst, of course, are the cow parsleys, like Queen Anne's lace, you know, big umbellifers. I'm sure, I don't know if you have them in the States. I should know. I lived in DC for many years. But they're a nightmare because they're all leaf and then these tiny little flowering heads. Anyway. But yeah, so being able to paint a big kind of florid decorative flower like this is a real treat. Okay, so what is going on there? That's a mess. That is a mess. So yeah, so with materials, the paper that I'm working on, I might do a little bit at the end on this, but the paper I'm working on, again, this one's behind. That's a weird line. I don't know what that's doing. The paper I'm working on is Fluid 100, which is made by Global Arts, and which is American actually. Both my papers are American, from American companies right now. So they operate out the States, and I think you can get their hot press paper, watercolour paper from most art stockists. I think, is there a range of art shops called Dick Blick? I think you can get the paper there. So, and it's hot press, which means it's incredibly smooth for painting and drawing on. And that means it takes the paint really, really nicely, and you don't get any bleeding or anything like that. Okay, so these are these petals, and if I go, I'm just going to put a little bit further around here. Again, it's really important when you're drawing and painting, really important to look at your subject matter all the time. I read somewhere that when you're drawing and illustrating, you ought to look at the thing you're drawing 80% of the time. And if you do that, then you're so busy looking at it that you kind of learn it by viewing it. So working around the petals and anchoring out at the outside edge. Okay. So I am hoping that you get zinnias growing in New England. I'm pretty sure you must do, right? Because I wanted to choose a plant that you lot in New England would be able to get your hands on. So the theory is, with this, that because I live in a very rural area and my internet connection is dodgy, the theory is that if I do this video, which Vicky will share with you, and then we'll have a Zoom Q&A at a later date, because otherwise what would be happening is that I would be very anxious that the Zoom would be falling out, because sometimes the screen just goes black. So it doesn't matter how well you paint, if the technology lets you down, then you're in trouble. Okay. So it's raining really hard here today, actually. It's beautiful. That noise was my small daughter who just came in to steal a stapler. So quite difficult to paint and at the same time gesticulate. No, go away, I'm filming. Still, she's used to it, bless her. Okay, so I'm going to let that dry, and I'm rinsing my brush. And so the next step is to make a more dilute version of the same pink. So here's the pink I've been using. So I'm literally just diluting. I mean, you lot know this, but in order to make a colour paler in watercolour, avoid using white, avoid mixing it with white, because that will make it heavy and muddy. You make a tint of it by just diluting it. And I might actually, at this point, I might add a tiny touch of red as well, because looking at the flower, there's a little bit. So this is a tiny touch of alizarin crimson from just off the screen. Great, Lizzie.
Okay, but that's slightly muddied it, so I'm going to put more of my original colour back in, a bit more water. When you mix colours, don't worry about how long it takes. Sometimes it takes ages. Sometimes it takes longer to mix your colour than it does to actually paint the subject matter. Okay, right, so that looks fun. And can you see how much wetter that is than the first colour I mixed? So what I'm going to do now is, again, looking closely at the plant, put the next layer down. So here, is it dark enough to hold weight? Yes, it is. So this is going to make it look slightly less stark, the distinction between the pale petals, the pale areas of the petal, and the areas that we've done the edging on, which are darker. So if I was a traditional botanical illustrator, I believe I would have taken all these petals. I'd have had an initial pale wash, and then I'd be building into the darks. Now, I've always said, I work from dark to light, but in fact, somebody who watches the videos on my YouTube channel, Lizzie Harper Illustrator, she's pointed out, Iris Gross, she's pointed out that actually I'm lying. I start with the mid-tones, because what I do is I come back and cover what I've painted with these sort of paler edgings, and then I will have one last pass, or a couple more. Oh, that's a bit messy. Or a couple last things where I pick out the darkest darks. But illustrators who don't put their darks in like that, but who work the whole thing from pale to darker, I'm incredibly impressed by them, because they keep all this information in their head of where their lights and darks are. I mean, of course, we're all looking all the time, but I find it so easy to feel like almost at this point in time I've got a roadmap of where my lights and my darks are. If you want to have a look at any more of my work, do feel free. I've got a website, www.lizzieharper.co.uk, and I do a lot of step-by-step blogs and things like that there. And on my Facebook page, Lizzie Harper Illustration, I've got a newsletter you can sign up to. And there's the YouTube channel, which has got a lot of videos of me talking through what I'm doing as I'm illustrating different subjects. Sometimes with accompanying blogs, sometimes without, which may or may not be of interest to you. Okay, so now it's really wet. Now this is crucial, because this is always really tricky. You're like, oh yeah, doing my flower, I want to get on with it. Oh yeah, let's get on with it. But if you don't let your paint dry, you will regret it. So make sure that you let your paint dry. I'm now looking at the colour. Remember I was saying that there's the colour underneath. Can you see? Yeah, you probably can. So it's extraordinary, actually. The colour of the underneath of these petals is almost green. Well, that's tiresome, isn't it? So I think what I'm going to do is, yeah, a little bit of yellow ochre, I think. So I'm taking a corner of that very light mix. Yeah, and I'm mixing it in with yellow ochre to bring out the yellows, and then I'm going to add a tiny touch of cobalt green, which basically makes a really nasty dark flesh colour, which, strange as it may sound, I believe is the colour of the underside of these petals. So okay, I'm going to apply that now, very lightly. And the thing is, when things repeat themselves through paintings, they make more sense. Oh, just splodged, haven't I? So in this case, that's not going to make any sense, because it's the only bit that has the tail end. Now this is good. I didn't plan on this, but this is me making a mistake and trying to fix it. So this is quite a bad mistake, to be quite honest with you. So what do? Weep into your milk and cry? No, you don't. You just keep working at it. So if you just scrub away with your paintbrush, and then with a clean bit of tissue, come and blot as hard as you can. Don't scrub around with the tissue or you'll compromise the paper. There you go. Now that's got rid of most of it. It hasn't got rid of all of it. And then you just do a patch up job where you messed up. Now what I would probably do if this was going to be a finished illustration is when I was done, I might get a tiny bit of Winsor & Newton Designer's white gouache and very lightly cover up over that. But I'm not going to do that now because we're concentrating on the petals. These ones dry? Yeah, those ones are nearly dry. Okay, so now I'm conscious of the time. So now I'm going to work into the darks. So they're very bright, but they're very dark. So I'm going to thicken up this mix here that we've been using and add a little more cobalt blue. Well, that's not good, is it? That's way too bright, too blue, too purple. Loads more pink. The pink is a less strong colour than the blue. That's a bit more like it, but I'm actually going to add a tiny bit of purple as well to just add a little bit of depth. That feels better to me. That feels quite a lot better to me for the darks. Maybe even a little more. You just have to keep going to look. It's almost like the colour, when you're colour matching, it's almost like the colour feels right. I'll put a tiny bit of brown in there as well. If I can remember where my brown is. And you'll know you're right once the colour will feel okay. So these are for the dark bits. Okay. So this petal now is nice and dry, so we can, without doing what I did before, which is putting my hand on the wet paint. Let's pick up the darks, overlaying that paint and blending it in. This with a lighter brush. I'm also, I don't know if any of you do this, but I lick my brush to get a point, and it's very naughty, but I do it. I can't stop now, but I was worried that I would die of cadmium poisoning, which, because I know cadmium yellow, which I use a lot of, is one of the colours that is meant to be quite dangerous. But it turned out, I spoke to a chemist friend of mine, it turns out that actually we're going to be okay, unless I eat about 5 pans of cadmium yellow a week. It's unlikely that I will suffer from cadmium poisoning. So there's one less thing to worry about. Okay, so can you see, trying to get a little bit of depth in here into these petals. With filming it's quite difficult because normally I rotate the page quite a lot as I draw, but I don't want to do that because then you won't be able to see what I'm doing. Okay, it's not bad. The petal behind that's nice and dark. The whole thing can be taken much darker. In fact, I'll take that darker again. That's going to have the whole thing. Can't work into that one yet because it's still wet. Curses. It's tiresome of it. And this one here is also dark. So again, being careful not to lean on what I've done. There we go. And this one is also in the shadow. This is now going a little bit too blue, looking at my colours. So I'll do some top colour washes in a minute. I think what I'm now going to do, having done that, I think I'm now going to pause the film and wait for these ones to dry. So then I can come back to you and show you what happens next. So I'll see you in a minute or two. Okay, back again. That's dried more or less. I had a chance to answer my emails. So let's work into the darks and these petals. This isn't on. Can you see this kind of tide mark? So if you work too wet with your top layer, if you're not careful, then you get this kind of edge effect where it dries, which with people who work looser than me, it can be very, very effective and beautiful. But for me, I find it really annoying. So hopefully if we just paint on top of it as if it's not there and don't panic too much, it'll be fine. And this is the darker darks, and then we're going to put a nice bright pink top wash, which will help us hide the white lines that we still have. What's happening here? Okay, there's a bit of shadow. The art of seeing shadows is also very tricky. I mean, quite often if I'm teaching, people will be like, what do you mean, draw the shadows? Where are the shadows? On leaves it's especially difficult. So you have to actually use your knowledge of the plant and a bit of logic, as well as just eyes, thinking, well, of course it's going to be a bit more shadowy here because there's a ridge of a petal, so it's going to be casting a shadow over there. And we know that our light source is coming from here. It's actually, I've got a daylight, got a daylight bulb, so it's kind of coming from that direction. So you just have to think logically and think, where are the shadows likely to be, and then look for them there. If they're not there, don't put them in. But often you'll find, if you sort of find and stick with a consistent light source with the shadows, that will help you. Okay, here's this annoying one. Its little tide mark. It's still pouring with rain here. I do like it, the plants need it. It's been very dry in England this summer, in Wales up till now. So we do need it, but it's absolutely tipping it down. Just changes the light. Changes the light and makes it flatter, which is no bad thing, I suppose. But I like it when it's sunny because there's more hoverfly and bee action outside my studio window. My studio's in my garden. I'm lucky to have a system where I can work from home. Okay. Oh, this is annoying. This isn't going so well. Okay. Hopefully it still suffice to show you how I work. So there we are. We've picked out our darks. Now, I don't know if you've heard of these. They're called Dr. Martens Hydrus watercolour inks. And I use them because they are incredibly bright. You don't want to use them straight on your artwork. They are too much, but they're very pretty. So here we go. So there's just a drop of this pink. You see how ridiculous that colour is. So bright. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to mix that. I'm going to get rid of this and then use just pure opera pink coupled with a bit of that. The Dr. Martens, and that colour is called Quinacridone Magenta. There we go. So I'm going to put some of that there, mix it in with our opera pink. It's a really in your face colour, isn't it? Nice and dilute. And that's going to go, once it's dry, it's going to go over all those petals that we've worked on, and hopefully, the plan is at least, that it will unify them. I'm just going to pause for a minute and let that little bit that's still wet dry, and then I think we'll probably have time to have just a little look at doing some yellows and stuff in amongst here. Okay, so what I've decided to do while those petals are drying is to do some work here on this centre. So these little ones, they're like little daisies. They're 5 petals, pretty easy to see, and it's a nice, okay, you can't see that, can you? There we go. It's a nice golden gold. So this one is, I think, cadmium orange light. Gosh, I should know the colour of my name of my colours. Thing is, I don't know if you're like me, so you set up your paint box and you learn what colours are in it, but you always forget, well, you sort of half forget what name they are. And then when you have to replace them, you panic a bit. Well, maybe it is just me. It doesn't sound like a professional at work, does it? Right, so these I know are something like cadmium yellow light. There we go. So that's about right to match the little star-like flowers on the edge. So literally these are pretty straightforward. All we're going to do, let's pull this down a tiny bit so you can see. The middle, yeah. Literally pick them out with the edge of the brush. And then once they're dry, we'll put a yellow wash over the top, and that will give them the definition that they need. I've got more water on my fingers again. I don't know what I'm doing today. It's no good at all. Literally just outlining it. So people sometimes will wonder about the fact that there's pencil. You know, oh my gosh, what do you do with the pencil? Well, with some smooth papers, such as this Fluid 100, we're very fortunate in that you can rub the pencil out afterwards. Aha, who knew? So the drawing, which is where the real hard work is, you do that in pencil and then you don't have to get rid of it. You can just leave it and rub it out later. I mean, it doesn't always work perfectly, but it works well enough for me. And in some cases, you know, you actually don't mind the pencil being there. So if you're painting a white flower, for example, you can leave the pencil line, which is where you've drawn the edge of the petals and things. You can leave that to stand as the actual edge of the petal. You don't need to go back and work into it, and it adds a lightness and a clarity that is very useful. Certainly for things like the cow pastures I was talking about earlier. It's really nice just to be like, you know what, I'm just not even going to get very much paint anywhere near that. I might put a little bit of yellowish wash over the white froths of flowers, anything which has a lot of white frothy flowers. Might put a bit of wash over them, but actually, you know what we're actually going to do is just leave the pencil to hold that shape. Okay, so now I'm going to mix something slightly brighter yellow, slightly paler yellow. Again, I'm not diluting it this time. This is just a different yellow which is straight from the box. It's a cadmium yellow light without any darker shades mixed in. Gosh, according to my watch, I'm meant to be finishing in 10 minutes. That's not going to give you much to go on. I do apologise. Okay, so there you go. Do that all around. So see, they've almost got enough definition there. I mean, I'll work into them a bit more. The centre of the flower is crazy. There's a lot going on there. There's a lot of kind of dark orangey red. So I'm going to mix up a little bit of cadmium orange dark with my yellow. Oh, it's so annoying when you're filming. Your camera's in the way where your head should be. It can be annoying. Okay, so this is just putting some of the texture in, which comes from all of these things which are pointing inward. I think with this film, I'm not going to be strict about the 45 minutes. I think once I've shown different ways of approaching different corners of the flower, I'll call it a day, but I don't want to leave you hanging without any kind of conclusion to my techniques. So this is just the way all these parts of this zinnia point in. They're actually all little, what are they? They're little bract. They're individual, yeah, they're individual bract, but I'm going to draw each one, partly because it would take too long, but also partly because it would confuse the issue. You can, you know, while it's very important to look all the time, you also, if you find a pattern that looks good when repeated and which suggests the botanical reality that you're looking at, then you would be a fool not to reduce it to that pattern. Okay, so then it's a bit darker on the edges. So cutting in amongst here. Hopefully you can see, yeah, you can see what I'm doing. This edge, this orange goes on a little bit. Outside here. Now I used to have, I've got rubbish eyesight, but I used to be very good at seeing things just with my contact lenses in really clearly, but in the last couple of years age has caught up with me, and now I need to wear glasses, and even though the glasses help, I still swear I can't see as clearly as I used to. It's very irritating. If I'm doing something really detailed like moss, I'll take my contact lenses out. I'm very, very short-sighted and work incredibly close with my lenses out. Or sometimes I take one lens out and leave one lens in. So one lens is busy mixing the colours and doing all that middle distance stuff, and the other eye is just on the close in detail. So now I'm just, again, this isn't any tints here, I'm just a slightly oranger thing, moving it in to the tip of each of these points. So that we have some feeling for what's going on as we move towards the centre of the flower. Oh, this, you know what's going to happen, this always happens. So if I do a demo, you end up thinking, oh, that's oh, maybe I'd like to do more on that. And you end up, instead of doing paid work, spending the rest of the day finishing the demo. I'm not going to be able to do that right now because I've got some pretty full-on deadlines, but it's tempting. Definitely tempting. So that's a technique for that bit. We've got this white bit here, and it ain't white, so that's going to be helped by our top wash of pink, which we're going to be able to do in a second, actually, come think of it. But what I do want to do is I want to put centres into these flowers, these little yellow flowers, star-shaped flowers that we've been doing. So that I'm using I don't even know what colour that is, it's a dark red, mixing with an orange, it's quite brownish, and just a tiny spot at the centre of each flower, and if there's an area of darkness, and a bit of shadow. Again, this is all just giving a bit of shape and a bit of depth to what you're doing. Okay, now here's that top wash I was talking about. I'm now using a tiny bit of it to pick my way around these. Remember, we're talking about these yellow filaments, which are part of these flowers, these petals here. When I'm done with this, I'm going to show you what I mean by pulling the flower apart, because it's worth knowing. But I don't want a really sort of odd white juxtaposition between where these pink petals end and where the heart of the flower lies. So I'm kind of trying to pull that together now in the least possible clunky way. It's a bit muddy, I'm rushing it a bit. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is turn it around again, turn the page around again. Make sure that you lot can see what I'm doing. Yeah, we're still centre screen, that's good. So now, do you remember that very pale top bright pink wash we were talking about, this one? I'm going to put that over the whole lot. Make or break moment. Again, always follow the line of growth. So hopefully, so I wouldn't be going horizontally across this. You have to follow the way that the veins go. It really helps, that does. Maybe this top wash is going to get rid of that hideous tide line on that petal as well. This is a nice thing about fluid paper, the Fluid 100 that I use, is when you paint on it, it doesn't lift up too badly the detail below. There are some papers which, when you do a second pass in watercolour, all the detail that you put your heart and soul into just gets lifted up and washed off. And what's nice about fluid is it doesn't seem to do that too much. Okay, and I'm even going to let that pink wash go on top of the underside there. So you see that's really quite wet now. Okay. It's a bit of a dog's dinner, to be honest with you. Okay, I'm going to let this dry, and then we're going to pick out our darkest darks and see where we're at. Okay, back in the room. So now this has dried. So can you see it just sort of looks a bit pinker? But what you need to do to make it really pop, I hate that word actually, but what you need to do is to pick out your darkest darks. So really now it's time to throw caution to the wind. So I'm going to put some really, so I'm mixing up something that's really quite a dark purple here. And I will use it very carefully, do not be concerned. And again, quite thick You don't want it to flop about everywhere. You need to know exactly where it's going to go. So again, twisting it so you've got a nice sharp point on your brush. And again, looking at your subject, which is rotated all over the shop. Oh dear me, so disobedient. And literally just pick out your darkest darks. It's a bit difficult because of the light at this angle, it's shining off the wet paint, so I hope I'm not going to destroy this. Really delicate use of the darks here. You don't want to overdo it, but at the same time you want that pop, that extra bit of shadow that really makes a difference between a piece of work that looks nice and a piece of work that really sort of has some drama to it, maybe. Or maybe I'm getting above myself. Just on the edges. And at this point, doing these darks, although I am still looking at the flower, I'm also thinking quite carefully about what will look best on the painting. So it's a balance now, rather than just being about copying the exact details of the flower. We're also trying just to make it look good. Don't want to overdo it. This is always the risk. You don't want to overdo things. And there's, yes, it really does cast quite a shadow here. So in fact, she says I don't want to overdo it, and then she really cracks open the purple. But that really is much darker, that leaf that's behind, that petal that's behind, not leaf. Oh, if I was to talk about this plant, the Zinnia, it's Molotov mix, or Zinnia elegans, I would have to say that the leaves are amplexical, which means they cling onto the stem, and that they are opposite one another, and they're quite kind of floppy, quite big and floppy. But we're not doing leaves today. It's a whole different ballpark. Okay, right, and then this bottom one. Can you see how this one here doesn't look as nice as the other ones because it hasn't got that final bit of detailing? So again, this really is picking out your darkest darks. Just those little bits. I want to leave this pale bit on the edge here because that's where the petal curves up slightly. And so hopefully this bit of film will have given you some idea of, it's actually really dark up there, right where I'm going to mix it in with a bit of pink. Sorry, I was about to say something totally different, then I just looking at it. This bit up here has really got some darkness going on. Is that still on the, yeah, it's still on the film. Of course it has darkness. I mean, only an idiot would think it didn't. Why was I not thinking? Because of course these little flower here, these yellow flowers, are casting shadow because they stand proud of the rest of the centre of the flower. There's always logic to lights and darks. It's always worth thinking it through. This bit here, which I hadn't painted in, which I'd forgotten about actually, is a sort of stunted half petal. It's not really grown fully into a full petal, but I'm gonna bring it into the sun now because it needs to be included. I haven't done that one, have I? Duh. I don't want that much dark on this one because it's above the others and it's sort of catching the light more. But it needs to be pulled into a crisper format. Okay, I'm going to knock that little bit there back a tiny bit with a little bit of pink wash. Got to be careful not to overwork. That's something I have learned over time to try and avoid. You can keep going back and keep going back, but you need to know and to say enough, enough is enough. I'm not going to do any more. This is just literally a bit of that tiny top wash, just softening the edges of the darkest darks. Yeah, well, that'll do, I suppose. Oh, and in the middle, I'm going to have another top wash. This one's a kind of orangey. It's quite hard to know what that colour is. You can't see the flower, can you, because of the angle I've got going, but okay. Okay. So that's just going to swallow up any errant bits of white that are left over. Oh, I said about that, didn't I? I said about the doing that last petal. Let's do that. Last stages, ladies and gentlemen, last stages. Last orders at the bar. Okay. So if I was actually working on the whole of this, I would be rotating it the whole time so that while different bits of it, see what that does, it's very dark. So that while different bits of it were drying, I'd be working into different, you know, other corners of it so that you wouldn't be using any time. But I'm just working on this one corner, which is why we've been having to do all these, all the pauses between things drying. If you're planning on doing the whole thing, you can just rotate the page and get on to doing a different bit. Okay, a bit more. This is just a bright pink, and I just want to make that one up there and stand back, but not lose any vibrancy. There we go. Oh, what did I do that for? Stupid. I have to smooth it out. This is definitely behind the other one, so I'm going to knock it back a bit. Okay. Any last? Now this is a cobalt blue that I'm mixing in with a purple for a slightly paler. Show you slightly what's nice when you're painting is you can use what you've already mixed. So here we go, there's a slightly paler purple. I'm making a tint of it, and that's just for a couple of bits of gentler overlap which are going on here. And which show the delineation between where the petals are. I'm not sure that's a good idea actually, maybe I messed that up. Yeah, that's all right. Okay, so there we are. That's basically this little demo finished. There's one more thing to do, which is the stigma and the anthers of those internal flowers. Whee! So let's get them nice and gold. And again, with this bit, the paint is very, very thick, so I know exactly what I'm doing with it, so it doesn't blur about. I'm sure you can tell there's two different things, two different structures. Now I'm fiddling. You can tell I'm fiddling, can't you? I don't think I need to spend ages fiddling away and wasting your time. But there you are. So let's have a look. Oh, now I've botched the camera. So this is the flower, and this is the corner of the illustration. So I'm going to zoom out a bit now, if I can. Oh, technology. Right, do you know what, and do you remember, oh, be careful not to ruin things now. Do you remember what I was saying about this flower? So I'm going to put this to the side for just for a sec. So when I was saying that these are all different flowers, so each of these little yellow ones, if you have a look, each of these is a little flower. I don't know if you can focus on that. Can you see? With little petal, 5 petals and a long, that's one flower. But here, these big external petals, come on you. Never feel bad about tearing a plant apart because you're learning from it. these are as well. They're called ray florets. These ones with these long, they're called straps. These are with these long ligule straps. And you see this little yellow bit? Is that clear? I'm hoping it's clear in the film. Don't know. These are yellow bits just here. So those are the anthers. So this is an individual flower. So it's worth remembering that anytime you're doing anything in the daisy family, there's that going on. And never feel worried about tearing plants apart when you're trying to draw them, because you need to understand them. So yeah, so in conclusion, there we go. I mean, it's only a corner, but hopefully it gives you some kind of idea of the techniques that I employ when I'm painting flowers. I'm going to do a tiny bit at the end on materials, but thank you so much for watching. So the last thing I wanted to do was talk to you about materials. So this is my paint box, and these are full pans and half pans, almost all Winsor & Newton actually. And when they run out, which they do quite often, they're the brown, I top them up from tubes. There's some discussion about that. A lot of artists will say you shouldn't mix tube paint with pan paint. I'm sure they have their reasons. For me, it's never really been a problem at all. So that's how I do it to keep on top of things. And obviously I wash my paints sometimes, but not enough. The yellows are always green. I'm a bit slapdash. If I need an extra sort of jolt of colour, I will use these, which I mentioned earlier, Dr. P.H. Martin's Hydrus Fine Art watercolours. This one's Gamboge, which is great for yellows. And I use them, I drop them in with watercolours, mix them in. And they're also worth remembering, especially with the pinks. They are fade resistant. So they're very useful. If I make mistakes, I use Winsor & Newton Designer's Gouache Permanent White, which is very useful. I very rarely use white in my illustrations, but sometimes I do. Sometimes I use Dr. Martin's white. Sometimes I use this. There are some colours that I find it very difficult to mix without white, such as Forget-Me-Not Blue and Primrose Yellow. We're drawing up pencils. I use an 0.5 millimeter lead Petal P205. These are mechanical pencils. Let's get rid of that. So when you can make the leads longer like that, and then if you want to sharpen them, you can just do that and you've got a nice sharp point without having to resort to a pencil sharpener. Rubbers, this is really good, this one. Try 24 Factis, just soft, very cheap, a couple of quid, a couple of dollars I guess. Paintbrushes, they have to be top of the range. Series 7, Winsor & Newton are #1. They're pure sable and they hold their tips, and they also hold quite a lot of colour all at once in the well. You can't fault them. They cost an absolute fortune. It's really irritating, but they are the one thing that I would find it really difficult to do without. Hand lenses, if you're doing botanical illustration, you really need to get your eye in. So this is I think this is either a 10 or 20 times hand lens, and if you're actually drawing something up close, you can just keep drawing while this is on your hand. And likewise, you probably, if you're doing a lot of botanical illustration with specimens, you want just like a little point, that's just a needle on a stick, so you can get in amongst things and scratch about, and a scalpel so you can do cross sections to see what's going on. And the last thing I wanted to talk about was paper. So I'm using two papers right now. This one is Stonehenge Aqua Hot Press, which has got a lovely silky surface. I've been using that a lot, and that's by Legion Paper. And also another hot press, which I was using for this one, which is Fluid 100. So there you go. So that's the surface of that one, really smooth. And right now for my botanical stuff, that is what I like most of all. So there we go. That's my equipment done and dusted. Hope that helps. Okay, I just quickly wanted to say something about colour matching. You might have noticed that the plant that I was drawing is a much darker colour than the sketch I did. And in fact, you can kind of get away with it. Somehow the eye compensates. So even though if you actually did match the colours, you'd be like, oh my gosh, this is so much paler than the other one. In order to get the detail across, you can get away with doing a much paler version of the same plant. The other thing you can do is you can keep working into it by adding layer on layer on layer and building up a sort of velvety depth to the colour, which in the 45-minute format we weren't able to do. I'll just show you what I mean. I'm going to take a photo just of the flower right up against the sketch, and I'll put that right after this. So you see the pink of this looks incredibly much paler than the pink of the actual zinnia flower. But if this was to be a complete illustration, it would still register as the same kind of dark pink as this flower is in real life. And I suppose that's where artistic decisions come into play, perhaps. So yeah, you can play about with that yourself, or you can keep going until the colour is exactly the same by layering more and more and more on top of that. But if you do that, be sure you don't lose your highlights, and also be sure that you don't overwork it. So there we have it. That was a quick demo of the way I go about doing watercolours of petals and of flowers. If you're interested in seeing more of my work, do check out www.lizzieharper.co.uk with lots and lots of examples of the work I've done over the years. And also there's a section called Originals for Sale, where there are loads and loads of my original illustrations that you can buy at quite modest prices. Likewise, if anybody be interested in buying this original as just an easier way to interpret what I've been doing, getting your hands on the actual painting and seeing what the paint does on the paper, drop me an email, info@lizzieharper.co.uk. But in the meantime, thank you so much for your patience. I hope it was of interest to you. Let me know if you'd like me to come back and do some more. Sorry that I couldn't use Zoom because of my broadband width, but I'm planning on doing a Q&A with you. That's Vicky's idea, which I think is a great one. And I've really enjoyed it. So good luck with your painting and your illustrating, and thank you for your time. Bye-bye.